Hello everyone, it's 7 o'clock. This is Sky News Breakfast. A big endorsement this morning for Liz Truss in the race to be the next Prime Minister. The Defence Secretary Ben Wallace has given her his backing. Last night, she and Rishi Sunak were quizzed by Tory members for the first time at a hustings in Leeds, with trust, tax and even Love Island on the agenda. We'll hear from Ben Wallace in just a minute. And the Labour Party is facing a challenge of its own as unions push back after a shadow minister was sacked for making media appearances from a picket line. Well, we'll be joined by that MP, Sam Tarry, later on in the show as another strike gets underway. Today, thousands of BT workers are walking out. Plus, the shocking new climate report, which says human-caused climate change made last week's record-breaking heatwave at least 10 times more likely. So lots to come on a very busy show. It's Friday, the 29th of July. A boost for Liz Truss as the Defence Secretary gives her his backing in the race for number 10.
The summer of discontent continues. I'm outside the BT Tower in central London as 40,000 BT staff walk out.
A new report finds human-made climate change made last week's record-breaking heatwave at least 10 times more likely. And with warnings of soaring energy costs, details this morning of how the government's £400 help for bills will be paid this autumn.
I'm live in Boston in Lincolnshire, where a murder investigation has been launched following the death of a 9-year-old girl from a suspected stab wound.
It's decision day in the Wagatha Christie case. Rebecca Vardy and Colleen Rooney will find out who's won their High Court legal battle. Grabbing the bull by the horns, the Commonwealth Games begin in Birmingham. Also coming up this morning, what will be the legacy of the Lionesses? We'll speak to the manager of a girls' football club about how to get more young women into the game.
That's when good neighbours become good friends.
No more Neighbours. After more than 35 years, the final 2 episodes of Australia's longest-running drama series will air tonight. We'll speak to one of the show's producers later on in the programme. Hello and a very good morning to you. Liz Truss has had a boost in the Tory leadership race this morning with the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace, who started as a frontrunner to succeed Boris Johnson, backing her to become the next PM. Well, last night the Foreign Secretary and her rival Rishi Sunak faced questions from Tory members in Leeds in the first of the party's public hustings. The former Chancellor was challenged over his loyalty and accused by one member of stabbing Boris Johnson in the back.
For me personally, it got to a point where I couldn't stay. As the gentleman previously also said, I had a significant difference of opinion with him on how to handle the economic challenges that are ahead of us. And at a situation like that, there was absolutely no way I could stay. Right? There is no way that a Prime Minister and Chancellor cannot be joined at the hip with regard to economic policy, particularly at a time when the economy faces real challenges. So I was left with no choice but to resign. And I'm sad that I had to, but that was the right thing to do, and that was me acting on my principles.
Well, Liz Truss, meanwhile, was asked if she was the right candidate to win the next general election.
We need to win. We need to win. And my friends, we can win against Keir Starmer, who is a patronising plastic patriot. He is beatable, but he is only beatable if we deliver. And I can assure you, if you select me, if you elect me, I will work my socks off in number 10 to deliver all of the promises we made in 2019.
So let's bring in our political correspondent, Rob Powell, and we're going to hear from the Defence Secretary in a few moments. But it's a big endorsement, him backing Liz Truss. She'll be pleased this morning, won't she?
Yeah, it is a significant endorsement. Ben Wallace is someone that, for a while, had been rumoured that he might run. He was, according to polls anyway, before he had announced what he was going to do, pretty high up the list of preferences in terms of Tory members. So I think you'd have to think that his endorsement will carry some sway amongst the members that will start voting on this in a few days' time. He's also written a couple of punchy pieces, given a punchy interview in The Sun and written a piece in The Times as well, where, yes, he's talked up Liz Truss and said that she's authentic, honest and experienced, but he's also taken a few swipes at Rishi Sunak as well, and the manner in which he left government when he resigned as Chancellor, obviously over Boris Johnson's conduct. He said what would have happened if the markets had crashed that day, and said he doesn't have the luxury of walking out of the door. So he clearly thinks that Rishi Sunak sort of abandoned his post, if you like, was missing in action, and also said that he wouldn't have had the luxury to do that because of his job in charge of security and defence. So yes, an endorsement for Liz Truss, but also a few swipes at Rishi Sunak as well. In terms of where we go from here, I think it just adds to the sense of momentum that Liz Truss has at the moment, coming out of those debates where I think earlier in the week there was a sense that Rishi Sunak, yes, was trying to put her economic plans under the microscope, but had perhaps overreached slightly in terms of the tone in which he did it, the aggressive tone in which he did it. And then I think there weren't any of the game changers that Rishi Sunak needed at that hustings last night. Now, there's a long way to go, but in another way, there also isn't, because ballot papers start landing on Tory doormats from Monday, I think it is, from the 1st of August. And if people are voting early, there's only really about a week left to go to really start to change some minds. So Rishi Sunak needs to catch up and quick. And I think an endorsement of this type is not good for him and only adds to the sense that Liz Truss, frankly, is starting to run away with this right now.
OK, well, it'll be fascinating to hear Ben Wallace himself. He will be here very shortly, the Defence Secretary. So for the moment, Rob, thanks very much indeed. So let's take a look at the papers then. And according to the Financial Times, Centrica, the owner of British Gas, is urging the government to give customers more support with their energy costs, even though Centrica's year-to-year earnings have gone up fivefold. The Guardian leads with the reaction of trade unions to the profits as an insult to working people. The Express carries Rishi Sunak's pledge to deport more than 5,000 foreign criminals out of the country if he becomes Prime Minister. The Daily Mail goes with the closure of what's being deemed an unsafe NHS child gender clinic. While the Daily Telegraph reports that the NHS could be banned from giving puberty blockers to children for fear of rushing them into changing gender. And finally, The Sun tells us that the judge in the Wagatha Christie libel trial won't tell the two women involved her verdict in advance in case it's leaked. Now, workers at the UK's largest telecom provider and England's largest exam board are walking out today in a dispute over pay. It's far from the only strike action taking place over the next month, with the so-called summer of discontent leading to walkouts across a range of sectors. So Sky's Madeleine Ratcliffe is down at the picket line outside the BT Tower for us now. So, Madeleine, another strike. Tell us what this one focuses on.
Morning, Anna. This is the first of two strikes planned by some 40,000 BT and Openreach staff after they rejected a pay rise of about £1,500, 5%. Now, BT say they will not be reopening that pay offer, that pay round, and they will work to minimise disruption. But there are so many other strikes planned this summer that there will undoubtedly be disruption. We've heard, obviously, rail strikes. There are more of those planned tomorrow, later in August. Airline workers, barristers, exam boards are also striking today. So this is all as workers really campaign for higher pay, more than inflation. That inflation currently 9.4%, that backdrop. They want more higher pay rises against this cost of living crisis, and will continue to strike this summer. So there will be disruption, even if today BT say they are working to minimise the disruption caused by its workers striking.
Maddie, thanks very much indeed. Now, a new report has found that the record-breaking heat wave that swept across the UK last week was made 10 times more likely by man-made climate change. The scorching conditions caused mass disruption while wildfires destroyed dozens of homes. And now researchers at the Copenhagen Centre for Disaster Research says the extreme temperatures would have been statistically impossible were it not for global warming. Aisha Zahid reports.
Last week's heatwave gripped Britain as record temperatures hit. Tinder dry conditions fueled wildfires. This was the aftermath. Buildings charred and homes destroyed. The UK's infrastructure just couldn't cope as air and rail travel was disrupted, and in the days that followed, grass fires continued.
This is just some of the devastation caused by the extreme heat. And now, according to new research, that blistering heat wave was made at least 10 times more likely because of climate change. Although scientists say that's a conservative estimate because extreme temperatures are rising faster than climate models predicted.
And that's causing concern among experts.
Without climate change, they calculated that this would have been an event that might have happened once in 1,000 years. They've calculated that with climate change, it was an event that would only happen maybe 1 in 100 years. But I think that they'll find that actually it's far more common even now due to climate change. It's showing that things are happening more quickly than we expect.
What kind of devastation could we see as a result of all of this in the future?
We know that for the next 30 years, things are only going to get worse anyway, because it won't stop until the world gets to net zero emissions. But it also means that we are in uncharted territory and we're in for some nasty shocks. And last week might be just the first of several nasty shocks we are going to experience.
While the UK saw a startling new reality during the heatwave, none of it should come as a surprise, as scientists now warn the consequences of the climate crisis on this type of weather could be worse than previously thought. Aisha Zahid, Sky News.
Well, the Defence Secretary and, as of this morning, Liz Truss supporter Ben Wallace joins me in the studio now. So you've come out and said that you're going to back Liz Truss. Why did you keep that to yourself for so long? Were you just waiting to see who was more likely to win?
First of all, I came out to announce today we're going to do wraparound childcare for, free wraparound childcare for all the men and women of the armed forces up to the age of 11 for their children. So that's a big £1.4 billion effort to help alleviate their cost of living as they serve our nation. So that's the policy announcement today. That's why we're doing the media round. But look on Liz Truss and my support for her is, I thought what I would do at the beginning of this contest is stand back. I'm the Secretary of State for Defence. I want to find a candidate that's going to do right by the department and recognise that the threats we face every day are very real and are growing, and that they need to be funded properly. We can't just sort of pretend they will go away by themselves. So, I looked at their performances, I looked at them on the hustings, but I also know them both. I've been in Cabinet for 2 years with both the Chancellor and indeed Liz Truss. And so, it was important for me to work out who I thought was the right person to take us forward. So, I know Liz, she's very straight, she's authentic, what you see is what you get. But also she has been very consistent in the support for defence and security. She reads the same intelligence reports I do. So I felt it was the right person to back.
Well, yes, she has been supportive. In fact, she's promised an increase in defence spending to 3% of GDP, but that's going to cost between 20 and 25 billion pounds, isn't it? She's also promising more than 30 billion pounds in tax cuts. She's promising to match NHS spending. She's promising to increase spending on border controls, on the Northern Powerhouse. I mean, if she was straight talking and authentic, wouldn't she spell out exactly how she's going to pay for all of that?
Well, she has. So first of all, on the defence spending increase, that is by 2030. That is saying that we need to grow the defence budget to be on a 3% of GDP by 2030. We're currently declining. We are forecast around 2026 to go below 2% of GDP, taking us from being the leader in Europe to down to about 8th in European defence spending, which would not be a sign of British leadership and not allow us to keep ourselves and indeed our allies safe. So the amount of money that's needed right now to increase defence spending is minimal. It would actually start rising. Well, first of all, on that commitment, the funding would really start rising in 2025. So there would be time to deal with the cost of living crisis that we have now and to use what her commitments currently are to address the issues. So obviously her £30 billion of tax cuts are to not put in place the national insurance rise that has only just or about to take place, is to suspend effectively the green levy on energy bills, because that is not necessarily a cost to the exchequer at the moment. It's just saying that we're going to suspend it for now, but to try and give people a better to face their bills. But she's also said that they are within the Treasury's envelope, the £30 billion. They are within the headroom that she could use to address some of the cost of living crisis. And I think, that is right. She's also said that the alternative, which is to keep this very, very heavy tax burden on people, as the OECD has said, would have a contractional effect on our economy, in fact, shrink the economy. Because the real way we address our debts and have the money to spend on government is economic growth. It's not tax and spend, it is grow the economy.
But the growth will take some time, and in the meantime, she's likely to break the government's own fiscal rules on borrowing.
No, she's not. She's not likely to break the fiscal rules. She's been very clear about that, and she's already said there is headroom within that envelope. And I think she has said that within 3 years, debt will start falling as a percentage of GDP, and that is the commitment she will make. But if we don't grow the economy, we simply won't have the tax receipts, even at the current tax levels, to fund what we need. And I think people seem to think that it's very simple. You just simply raise a tax, pay off the debt and go back. That's tax and spend economics. The economics I'm interested in is how do we stimulate growth? So cutting the right taxes, like not proceed with corporation tax rises, helps us grow. I mean, when Rishi was Chancellor, he cut entrepreneurial relief. He cut the relief that we give to our entrepreneurs who've invested in this country, invested in businesses. And that's not a way to create either wealth or indeed growth.
OK, you talk about authenticity, but Liz Truss was a Liberal Democrat. She's now obviously a Tory. She was a Remainer. Now she's a Brexiteer. So is that being authentic?
Yeah, I think she's been very honest. That's, she's been, as she's gone through life, as many young people go through life. No, I think she's developed. I think people develop through life. Everyone... many of the people that are your journalists or indeed your commentators, some of them in the mainstream media, some of them started lives as communists and are now sort of rabid Tories. So I think what I would say is people go on journeys politically because of their upbringing and their influence of their parents and all things. She'd often said that when she was 7, her parents, who were left-wing, took her to CND marches. Doesn't make her a rabid CNDer. It's just part of the experience of growing up. And I think that's important that we recognise people develop all the way through their lives. And that's not about being inconsistent. But I think what I can tell you, having sat next to her in the Cabinet, is that what you see is what you get. And something else that's really important, she's actually incredibly experienced in government. She is the only candidate that did nearly 2 years in the Treasury as the Chief Secretary of the Treasury. That's the number 2 position. It attends Cabinet. It's incredibly important. It's the bookkeeper of the country. She did that job in the Treasury. She was then international trade and negotiated trade deals. And now she's been Foreign Secretary. That's a broad experience that I'm afraid Rishi doesn't have. Yes, he's been, in the Chancellery, but that doesn't have that broad experience.
Well, let's talk about Rishi Sunak, because Nadine Dorries, the Culture Secretary, was on the show yesterday, and she suggested that he was involved in a coup to remove Boris Johnson. Is that how you see it?
I'm not coming here to attack the other candidate. My view is Liz can sell herself on her qualities. I think she has many qualities. I don't think, we're going to get into... We don't want this blue on blue. I'm not sitting here poking sticks at Rishi Sunak. Rishi Sunak is a very clever, very capable member of the Cabinet, or was a member of the Cabinet. He is, any government would be, pleased to have him in the government. But fundamentally, I'm here to say why I think Liz Truss is the best candidate.
Well, you say you're not going to criticise the Chancellor, but you've been very critical of the Chancellor in the papers, haven't you? You talked about him walking out. You said that you didn't have the luxury of walking out.
Well, I said some ministers don't have the luxury of walking out. I mean, if you actually look at that article, I was asked why I didn't resign. And I said some ministers don't have the luxury of resigning because fundamentally we have duties and obligations. I have... Myself and the Home Secretary, for example, we sign warrants. We have a role in the operational delivery of defending this nation. She does warrants, etc. I have to take responsibility in operational authorities and decisions around our forces around the world. So I can't just sort of junk it all in and walk out the door.
Would you have liked to have walked out?
No, I didn't want Boris Johnson to go. I wouldn't have thought that was the way to do it. But I also made clear, and I made a tweet at the time, that for those colleagues who do want to express their lack of confidence in the government, there's a very simple way of doing that. There was going to be in 1922 a vote predicted on the Monday the next week, a couple of days after Rishi resigned, and they could have done it that way. They could have voted the Prime Minister through confidence in the party, and you could have done it. That's the mechanism.
He said he couldn't stay a moment longer while there was this significant difference over economic policy. You say he was wrong to go.
No, I just don't think triggering Cabinet ministers walking out at a time of a crisis is the right course of action. There were other mechanisms to do what they wanted. If Rishi Sunak didn't want the Prime Minister to be Prime Minister, there were other mechanisms to do that. And that goes for all the other ministers, I felt. But, he made his choices. He reconciles himself with that. I'm there to the end. My job until I'm replaced by a Defence Secretary, and it's perfectly legitimate that Prime Ministers pick and choose their cabinet. I have that obligation not just to my leader, but also to the men and women under the Forces Command.
Did he really leave the country in the lurch? I mean, another Chancellor was appointed pretty much immediately.
Well, look, let's look at that Friday afternoon. I think it was a Friday. What if the markets had crashed? What if the Home Secretary had done that and there was a terrorist attack? What would the public think? They would never forgive us for that. So I just took the view. My judgment was, well, first of all, I didn't want the Prime Minister to go, but if I had been in that position, I think there was another mechanism of doing it. That was the 1922 procedures the following week. I don't think people needed to walk out. The public would see that as a government not thinking about the job in hand. And I think, there were many other opportunities if they'd wanted to do it in a different way.
You talk about economic emergencies. Many would say we're going through one now with the cost of living crisis. We learned yesterday new estimates for energy bills going to go even higher than predicted, as high as £3,850 a year by January. The current package just isn't sufficient, is it? More has to be done.
Well, I think we all recognise we've got to try and do, all of us do our bit. Government has control over some things, like the levy, the environmental sort of precept that Liz Truss has said she would suspend. We all have a role in what we can do.
Make a big difference.
But there's also going to be a return on people's energy bills that the current government has helped deliver, including the Chancellor. There's going to be a return. I think it's being set out today how people are going to get money off their energy bill. I think
that's just £400.
But £400 a year ago was a lot of money. I mean, it is a contribution that the government can make. Obviously, making sure that we unlock investment into alternative energy sources is incredibly important for the medium and the long term. So this is not just a short-term problem. We're going to have to deal with this in the medium term. And I think, I supported the government's plan and Rishi Sunak's plan to actually put, the energy tax, the windfall tax on earlier. And I think, that is the right place to go if the energy companies aren't investing in UK capabilities. So I think we are doing our bit to raise money from the energy companies to try and alleviate the pressure. Of course, the problem is energy prices are going up and up and up and up. There are other measures that we're all going to have to get involved in, and I notice countries in Europe are already doing it about energy-saving measures. What steps can we all take at home to try and reduce our energy? That is got to be something we've all got to contribute to. But there is a reality here, which is a very difficult problem for us all, which is it is an energy crisis born out of things like the war in Ukraine around the world, where we have very little control over. It's why it's important that we see off people like Putin, that we make sure we equip our armed forces to give the world that stability and security, because without that security, we will see more of these problems.
And that's a long-term aim, but for now, people need money. Should the windfall tax be increased? Should more money be gained from the windfall tax? We saw big profits yesterday from two energy companies.
First of all, the windfall tax itself is a percentage. So if they get more and more money, they're going to get more and more. They're going to be paying more and more tax. So I think you will see an increase in receipts from that tax as they make more profits themselves. So I think that is really important that we understand that. I think what we need to make sure is that we constantly explore the measures for the cost of living. But look, it's not just in energy, it's going to be in food. There is global insecurity, whether that is in Ukraine or whether that's in the Pacific. We're all connected today. We're all linked in this world. COVID has been a global pandemic that we are all dealing with the shock of it. That does mean there aren't any magic wands. It means that we all have to invest in our resilience. We have to invest in our diversity of a supply. We are very lucky in Britain, and while we are going to face some very tough energy bills in the future, we are not dependent on Russian gas like many European countries who have no choices.
I want to talk very quickly about your brief about defence, because Sir Stephen Lovegrove, the UK's National Security Advisor, has warned in the last few days that the West risks an initiation of nuclear conflict with China or Russia because of a breakdown of communication with the two countries. Do you agree with him?
Well, I went to Moscow, as did Liz Truss, to speak to our counterparts just before this war. We keep lines of communications open. I have met with the Chinese ambassador about a year and a half ago, and I'm he's right that it's always important to talk to countries, even if you find it difficult or distasteful, or indeed, it is a challenge because there's a conflict in Ukraine. But I think fundamentally that is not always the real component of why security can be imperiled. It is often the intention of the other country. President Putin has defied all logic in what he has done in Ukraine. Everyone from his friends to his adversaries advised him not to do it, from presidents to prime ministers. We saw the legendary sort of marathon phone calls of President Macron to Putin, and he still did it. And that's very hard because, when someone just doesn't want to listen to reason, sadly, you end up in a very difficult position. That's where we are in Ukraine, a proper war. The Russians are failing at the moment on the ground in many areas. Putin's plan A, B and C has failed, and he may look to plan D. But, doesn't matter how many times you say them, it's not the right thing to do. You can't just get somewhere with warm words. Sometimes you need warm words and, I'm afraid, some hard power alongside it.
And on the subject of Ukraine, Liz Truss back in February said she supported individuals that wanted to go and fight there. Was that a misstep on the world stage?
I think what she was saying is it is a very noble cause, right? I mean, this is a fascist state invading Ukraine. I mean, the behaviour of President Putin, where 2.5 million Ukrainians have been deported to Russia through filtration camps, where there have war crimes been committed, where rapes and pillaging effectively is going on, where random civilian parts of towns are being hit by missiles. It is a noble cause. And I think what she was saying is all of us feel that in this country. All of us look at our television screens, whether we're from the Labour Party, the Conservative Party, or even the SNP in our house, and think this is wrong, this is brutal, this is on our doorstep. I think that's what she was saying.
OK. Ben Wallace, thanks very much indeed for your time. And we did note what you said about childcare for military families. Thanks very much indeed. Okay. And just a reminder that Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss will go head-to-head in a live televised debate here on Sky News. Kate Burley will be hosting that programme on Thursday, the 4th of August at 8 p.m. And if you'd like to be a member of the live studio audience and be in with a chance of asking a question, please apply by scanning the QR code, which is on the screen now, or via the link on the Sky News app and website. Do stay with us, still to come here on the show. The summer of discontent continues as BT staff now go on strike. We'll speak to the General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union down on the picket line. That's coming up a little bit later. Also, how will the Port of Dover cope this weekend as we head into one of the busiest periods for channel crossings? I'll be joined by the head of policy at Logistics UK to find out how freight will be affected. And Labour's Shadow Environment Secretary Jim McMahon will be on the show a little bit later to talk about his party's plans to deal with the cost of living. Now, police in Lincolnshire have launched a murder investigation after a 9-year-old girl died from a suspected stab wound in Boston. Well, Sky's Fraser Moore joins us from there now. So, Fraser, what more can you tell us about this incident?
Well, Lincolnshire Police are giving out very few details at the moment, Anna, other than to confirm it was here on Fountains Lane in the centre of Boston in Lincolnshire that they were called out at 6:20 yesterday evening to attend an incident where a 9-year-old girl had suffered a suspected stab wound. Shortly after that, police announced that they were conducting a murder investigation after the death of that 9-year-old girl. They say that her family has been informed. They're currently being assisted by specially trained officers. And in terms of the situation here, the geography of the area here, we're very much in the commercial part of Boston. There are very few residential properties around here. This is an accountancy firm car park where the police are just down there. That's another car park. So very few residential properties around here. Most of the businesses that are here are either closed permanently or would have been closed at the time of this incident just after 6 o'clock last night. Forensic officers have been here until the early hours of this morning. We can see evidence of that. We can see yellow forensic markers, those yellow numbered markers highlighting areas of interest to the forensic officers, potential evidence that they may well be gathering, and we understand they'll be returning here later on this morning to continue their inquiries. The local MP, Matt Warman, he says he's spoken to the policing minister and asked for any national assistance that may be useful to the Lincolnshire Police to be made available as quickly as possible. They say that this area will be sealed off for the foreseeable future as their investigations continue into now what is a murder inquiry following the death of a 9-year-old girl from a suspected stab wound.
Fraser, thanks very much indeed. So let's take a look now at some of the day's other headlines. And with warnings that energy bills could reach close to £4,000 this winter, the government has announced details of how its promised £400 discount will reach its customers. The discount will be paid over 6 months from October, and those who pay their bills via standard credit, payment card and direct debit will receive it automatically. Britain's only children's gender identity clinic is to shut down. The Tavistock and Portman NHS Foundation Trust has been instructed to close following criticisms over long waiting lists, as well as a lack of consensus in assessments. It'll be replaced by 2 regional hub services next year. In Ukraine, officials say that a counter-offensive against Russian forces in the occupied Kherson region is gaining momentum. Fighting is continuing in much of the country, with reports of missile strikes on the capital, Kiev, last night. The UK's former ambassador to the US, Sir Christopher Mayer, has died aged 78. His 6 years in the post came during the Clinton and George W. Bush eras. The news was confirmed on Twitter by the current ambassador, Karen Pierce. A state of emergency has been declared in the US state of Kentucky in response to severe flooding caused by torrential rain. At least 8 people are known to have died. London's fire chief wants a total ban across the country on disposable barbecues. The call comes after the London Fire Brigade experienced its busiest week in history last week. And the Fire Commissioner warned of the untold damage the disposable barbecues cause as we look ahead to a potential second summer heatwave. And with parts of the world experiencing extreme weather conditions, let's take a quick look at the impact of climate change on the planet. You can see there our data dashboard. The right-hand side of the screen shows how the UK's power is currently being produced, and the top left is a crucial figure. You can see just how much warmer the planet is now since the Industrial Revolution, when modern record keeping began, currently at 1.25 degrees above that level. The total amount of CO2 emissions, the amount that we're pumping out into the atmosphere in millions of tonnes, down in the bottom left-hand corner. Now it's decision day in the so-called Wagatha Christie trial. Rebecca Vardy and Colleen Rooney are due to find out who's won their High Court libel battle. The case started off with an online spat before heading to the courts for a legal fight costing millions of pounds. It started in October 2019. In a now famous Instagram post, Colleen Rooney accused Rebecca Vardy of leaking false stories about her private life to the press. In June 2020, Mrs Vardy responded by launching libel proceedings against Mrs Rooney. Mrs Vardy's lawyers claim she suffered extreme distress as a result of the Instagram post. And in the following November, the libel battle had its first hearing at the High Court. In April 2022, the court was told Mrs Vardy appears to accept that her agent was the source of allegedly leaked stories. And in May 2022, Mrs Vardy and Mrs Rooney came face-to-face in court during a week-long hearing. Well, the verdict is expected at noon today, and we will, of course, bring that to you live here on Sky News when it happens. Now, everybody needs good neighbours, but tonight, viewers of the long-running Australian soap will be saying goodbye to the residents of Ramsay Street for the final time. After 37 years and nearly 9,000 episodes, Neighbours is coming to an end, with the final episode being broadcast in the UK later on. Our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer, reports.
Wow, 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 look at this.
As goodbyes go, get ready for a nostalgia trip.
We made it, huh?
Home sweet home.
Returning to Ramsay Street to ensure Neighbours gets a fitting send-off, some of the household names whose big breaks came on the soap.
I love you guys so much. Congratulations on your wedding, Toady.
Funnier, sunnier than its British equivalents, in the late 80s, Neighbours pulled in around 20 million viewers. But with audiences down to 1 million and a new commitment to original drama from Channel 5, they pulled the plug, calling last orders at the Waterhole.
Being best man at a wedding's big responsibility. Now, I don't know why it wasn't picked up by a streaming channel, you know, and to be the first yet to set another trend, Neighbours to set another trend and be the first soap to transfer over to a streaming channel, but didn't happen.
Charlene, get out of there! It was former BBC One controller Lord Michael Grade who gave it its tea time billing some 37 years ago, thanks to his teenage daughter Alison, who was told off for watching it in her school break.
Being the controller of BBC, what were you watching? She said, we're all watching Neighbours, we can't watch it because we're... Oh, I went into the office the next day, I said, we're moving Neighbours from 1:35 to 5:35 so the kids can watch it when they come home from school. And the rest is history, as they say.
From the dulcet tones of Angry Anderson at Scott and Charlene's wedding to the psychedelic meanderings of Bouncer's dream, not forgetting Susan's sensational slap.
I remember a woman calling out from across the road in traffic, just calling out, Susan, Susan, you leave that. Like, okay.
Fans are promised a fulfilling, joyous finale, a reward for those who remember it so fondly.
Neighbours wouldn't have lasted 37 years without the UK audience. We're very, very appreciative, and we hope and pray, fingers crossed, that when you watch those last episodes, we will have done the show proud and you'll be satisfied with the way it ends.
We might be leaving the street, but we're always going to be in each other's lives.
Always.
This final slice of life down under.
It all goes so quickly.
The end of an era, as fans say g'day to Ramsay Street for the last time. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Coming up on Sky News Breakfast, I'm going to be speaking to the General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union as tens of thousands of BT staff walk out over a pay dispute. Let's return now to the strike action going on today. Workers at the UK's largest telecom provider are walking out today in a dispute over pay. Well, the General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union, Dave Ward, joins me now from the picket line. So, Dave Ward, why are you striking?
Yeah, good morning, Anna. Well, our members, this is the first strike in over 35 years across the BT group. And the reason that we're striking today is because the guy who runs BT, Philip Jansen and the board, are ripping off the workers and ripping off customers at the same time. So what we're seeing at the moment is the company posting profits last year of £1.3 billion. They've just posted profits in the first quarter of this year of £400 million, and they've imposed a pay deal this year on the workforce that is simply insufficient to deal with the situation with the cost of living crisis. And, you know, I'm going to say this today, that there needs to be some sort of inquiry into the actions of these boards that are ripping off the whole of society at the moment. And our members are not going to put up with it anymore.
Well, yes, and the BT boss himself, though, says he thinks what workers have been offered is fair and affordable. He says it compares really well with any other company. And he said he's sad and disappointed that the strikes are going ahead today. He says that workers at BT have been offered the biggest pay rise for 20 years.
Well, that's not true. And the reality is our members never had a pay rise the year before. They had a one-off bonus. And this year, what they've offered is insufficient. I mean, this is against the background as well. When I say that they are ripping off people and our members are feeling disgusted at the actions of the CEO and the board, these guys, he got a 32% increase. And I just don't think that this is acceptable anymore today. I think every single one of your viewers will understand that this level of inequality in the way that workers are being treated versus the companies themselves. They gave £750 million to shareholders before they then imposed an inferior pay deal for workers. This can't continue. People are not going to put up with it.
But meanwhile, around the issue of strikes, there's been a lot of news, hasn't there? The Labour leader Keir Starmer sacked his shadow transport minister Sam Tarry, who joined the picket lines, hadn't he, this week? He said it was for doing unauthorised interviews with the likes of us here at Sky News and was making policy up on the hoof. What do you make of Labour's handling of the strikes?
I mean, look, that's a matter for Keir Starmer. But I have to say that from where I'm sitting, it looks to me like Labour want to win an election without any principles. And I think people will see through that over time. I think our own members will feel really, unhappy about the way that Labour are dealing with these things. In these moments, when people are under so much pressure, you have to come forward with policies. You have to be prepared to support working people. And if Labour don't do that, I think trade unions and community organisations will fill that vacuum to stand up for working people. And that's what we're also talking about. We're also talking about other forms alongside this particular dispute. We're talking about, forms of collective action later on in the summer that all workers can participate in. And we're talking to other trade union leaders about that as part of a campaign for a new deal for workers, separate to this current dispute.
We'll expand on that a little bit. I mean, Labour's former Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, said that he would support a general strike where different industries coordinate action. Is that something that you would look to do?
Well, the general strike took place in 1926. Our focus is on our members primarily. And that is, where that will remain. But let me say that at the same time, I do think that working people are being let down across the political parties at the moment. I think they have to come together in a different format. I would support a new social movement led by trade unions, community organisations to stand up for working people. And we are talking to other trade union leaders and the TUC about forms of collective action that we could all take. So, that will probably start in the next few weeks.
What would it look like?
Well, I think that's for us to have those discussions. I think there'll be a moment probably where we'll hold a press conference and we'll be happy to talk to you about what that looks like. But I think it's about making the government act to support working people on the cost of living crisis and all of the things that are associated with that, but also to act against these type of business leaders. You can't carry on here letting these type of people live almost in a parallel galaxy, let alone a parallel universe, and treat their workers the way they are, and they are ripping off customers. These guys announced yesterday, on top of 400 million in the first quarter profit, on top of the 1.3 billion, that they are going to put prices up, which will amount to 23% price increase in 12 months. I don't think anybody will accept that. And I would urge the government to do an inquiry into the way that BT are running this company.
OK, and of course the boss would say he's just looking after the company and its future, which is in the interests of the workers. Dave, well, we appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed for talking to us this morning.
Thank you.
Now, as we've been reporting this morning, Liz Truss has received a strong endorsement in her quest for the Tory leadership from the Defence Secretary Ben Wallace. And I was joined by Mr Wallace a little bit earlier. He told me the Foreign Secretary has been consistent in her support of defence spending. And in a veiled criticism of her rival Rishi Sunak, he said that Cabinet colleagues shouldn't have walked out on Boris Johnson.
I just don't think triggering Cabinet ministers walking out at a time of a crisis is the right course of action. There were other mechanisms to do what they wanted. If Rishi Sunak didn't want the Prime Minister to be Prime Minister, there were other mechanisms to do that. And that goes for all the other ministers, I felt. But, he made his choices. He reconciles himself with that. Let's look at that Friday afternoon. I think it was a Friday. What if the markets had crashed? What if the Home Secretary had done that and there was a terrorist attack? What would the public think? They would never forgive us for that.
Now, a giant bull, the Red Arrows and Duran Duran. The Commonwealth Games has opened in spectacular style with a celebration of its host city, Birmingham. Prince Charles drove into the stadium in a vintage Aston Martin and in his speech said the Games would create memorable shared experiences. Becky Johnson was there.
It promised to be a celebration of Birmingham. A showcase of its story from past to present. In the city of the car, a starring role for royalty, Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall here on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen. Then the roar of the Red Arrows over the Alexander Stadium. Birmingham rock legend Tony Iommi leading a tribute to a modern, multicultural city, a celebration of newcomers.
That every child deserves the chance to reach her full potential and pursue her wildest dreams.
Hear my voice.
In the city of 1,000 trades, a scene to recall the female chain makers of the Industrial Revolution, the woman and the bull leaving behind the shackles of the past, a sign of acceptance, of moving forward. Watching from the city centre, the crowd were wowed.
It's really impressive. It's nice to see Birmingham on the map, to be honest.
I've just learned so many things about Birmingham already. I didn't know basketball was made here, for example.
Athletes welcomed to the stadium from 72 nations and territories. It promises to be a Games for everyone, inclusive, diverse and vibrant, embodying the values of the host city. Becky Johnson, Sky News, Birmingham.
Now, this weekend could see more delays and disruption at the port of Dover as demand for cross-channel sailings is expected to surge in the coming days. Well, I'm joined now by Natalie Chapman from Logistics UK. That's the trade body for the freight industry. Very good morning to you. First of all, a bit of a nightmarish weekend last weekend. What, in your view, went wrong in Dover?
Oh, good morning, Anna. Yes, last weekend was a real challenge. We saw freight drivers stuck in the queue for well in excess of 18 hours in some cases. It was a combination of factors. It was the busy summer getaway weekend, which had been anticipated for quite some time. Every weekend throughout the summer, we'll see tourist traffic peak, but that first getaway from the school holidays is always the busiest. And the difference this year is that there's enhanced passport checks at the border. The borders are juxtaposed, so you go through the French border in the UK, and there weren't the anticipated number of French border officers that the Port of Dover had expected to manage A, that increase in demand, and B, the increase in transaction times from those enhanced checks on passports.
So you agree with a number of government ministers who put the blame on the French not turning up with enough border officials, do you? Because the French say this is about Brexit, this is about the fact that passport control takes so much longer now because passports have to be stamped.
Undoubtedly, it takes a lot longer. We've seen challenges at crossing down at Dover for many, many years, whether it's been industrial action or poor weather, or we saw in Christmas of 2020, many drivers spending days on end in their cab, and that was because of COVID closing the border. So it's an incredibly fragile border. There are undoubtedly more challenges, and the transaction times do take longer post-Brexit. But what we need to make sure going into this weekend and every weekend throughout the summer is that we have sufficient resources so that we can mitigate as much as possible those additional checks and that additional time that's needed.
And are you satisfied that that will do it? Is the current system fit for purpose?
Well, we saw last weekend the challenge, particularly on Friday, and we understand that on Friday night there were very high-level talks between the UK and French governments, and we did see additional Border Force officers deployed on the Saturday, which helped start clear some of the backlog, but Saturday was even busier than the day before. Through this summer, we need to focus on what we can do, which is making sure appropriate resourcing, but looking longer term, looking to the 2025 border strategy, for example, we need to make sure that we can digitise as many of those processes as possible, that as much as possible can take place away from the border. Clearly, some checks will still have to take place at the border, but if we can do as much as we can to minimise any disruption, because it's such a key trade route for the UK, but it's incredibly fragile. So we need to make sure that it is as robust as we can possibly make it.
Well, Natalie Chapman will be keeping a close eye on the situation at Dover for the sake of those lorries trying to get freight through, but also, of course, for holidaymakers as well. Natalie Chapman from Logistics UK, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
Do stay with us here on Sky News Breakfast. We've got lots coming up for you in the next hour, including Liz Truss secures a major endorsement in her bid to become the next Prime Minister. More on that next.